Hello and welcome to everyone. I find myself back on the Blackwater doing my absolute best to try and get a double figure fish off of this diminutive river that splits the Berkshire and Hampshire border for a majority of its run. This I believe is my 22nd trip onto the Blackwater, and over the past 3 years I've managed 3 barbel, so a couple of 5s and a fish of 9-1 which I had back in, I think it was August or September 2023. So and that was my last barbel for year 2. Or was it? No, maybe it wasn't. Maybe I had the 2 5s a little bit after. Anyway, I'm back on the Blackwater prospecting with that centre pin in the background there, hoping it'll screech off at any moment. I've been on here since 11 o'clock this morning. I'm probably going to be on here until probably about 8-9 o'clock this evening. Being a Sunday, I'll make sure I get back with a decent amount of time so I can get myself prepped, decent night's kit ready for work tomorrow. Just to recap on the season so far, being the fact that we're in the middle of November already, and the chill in the air is now starting to suggest that winter is definitely going to be on its way pretty soon. Temperatures over the course of the next 7 to 10 days look as if barbel are probably going to be off of the agenda, and it's going to be more along the lines of predators and grayling and potentially some roach if I can find a viable venue to go and target some. So today is probably going to be the last decent day in terms of water temperatures, to which at the moment it's still measuring at 11.6 degrees Celsius, which is certainly warm enough that I would expect if I could find barbel that would catch 1 or 2. But I think I've fished quite a lot of very favourable conditions for barbel on this river over the last 3 years, and for the majority of that I've come away with my tail between my legs wondering what on earth I'm doing wrong. I'm not necessarily sure that that is what is wrong, it's just simply location just isn't quite right. I'm probably even fishing in swims where they are present, but unfortunately just not managing to be there at the times when they're feeding. I think coupled with a couple of other external factors, the barbel probably aren't here in as big a numbers as they have been. I know a couple of anglers who have fished this in the past and have suggested that it's quite a decent section of river to target barbel, but unfortunately their numbers seem to be dwindling. No doubt the otters that have recently arrived here in the last 18 months have got something to do with that, but also the pressure from those has meant that the chub and the barbel have just simply moved away. So it's a case of trying to find out where they are. But that's all part of the game. You know, it's never going to be straightforward. On a lot of the rivers that I've fished, that's been the case. So I've just got to continue doing what I'm doing. You know, it seems to be working on some rivers, whether it's instant success or it's actually catching fish within a fairly decent amount of trips, 2, 3, 4 trips, something like that, and then chalking the river off. You know, if I can manage to do that, you know, on probably another 5 of the 10 rivers that I need to chalk off, then I think that would be a fantastic return, I think, because there are rivers that have been extraordinarily difficult, the Blackwater being one of them. You know, some of the areas I've been fishing are by no means prolific, but normally when you do catch, they do tend to be of a bigger size. So that's what I'm holding out hope for. As I was going to say, just touching on from how this season's gone so far. So I've been about a bit, but time has definitely been hard to come by on the fishing front. Even after work sessions on the Kentish Stour and the Blackwater, you know, I've been hard to come by. Work's just been so busy, family life's been busy, so it's not been easy to find the time. I've managed a few trips to the Bristol Avon where I've had some pretty good success. I haven't had a double, but I've had 8 barbel in 4 trips. One of those trips yielding 6 fish over the space of a 10-hour night session. So I thought that was an incredible result considering the condition that the Bristol Avon is currently in terms of the overall catchment not being anywhere near the river it once was. But there are definitely fish still present, and I just so happened to find a few on that evening. Plenty of young ones as well. The biggest I've had is 9.6, but a majority have been between the 5 and the 6 pound bracket, which is obviously very, very good and bodes well for the future in that specific area, but I know that certainly isn't the case throughout the entire catchment. I can only hope that this would be a blueprint for other sections further up the Bristol Avon catchment, and maybe one day, you know, revive, you know, might find some sort of form that it did back in the 90s and the early 2000s before what we all know what happened. Before all that happened, you know, it'd be nice to see it once again churning out some good numbers of fish all the way through Chippenham, all the way down through the other big towns like Bath. It'd be lovely to see, and that's one thing that this challenge has enabled me to do, is to just fish loads of different rivers, some on the up, some way down in the doldrums, and some of those that are managing to hold the sort of numbers of small fish and big fish that they are producing. You know, everyone talks about the Trent. It's the most high profile river in the country in terms of Barbel, but there are other rivers that are much more under the radar that are still producing some very good fish. And not every fish has to be a double for it to be important. You know, everything, even the 2 to 4 pound range, they're incredibly important as well, very much as the doubles. You know, we find ourselves in a position now where rivers are starting to, you know, really struggle in terms of producing their own fish. So having to be propped up by the likes of Calverton Fish Farm, which is all well and good as a temporary short-term solution, but obviously going forward there needs to be a much bigger plan put in place in order to get rivers put back to some sort of, you know, ecological standard that can support not just barbel but can support roach, chub, dace and all the other species that obviously share the waters with barbel, you know, and with that will then become healthy populations of predators as well. So they're all hand in hand, but unfortunately rivers like the Blackwater, there doesn't appear to be an awful lot of barbel of any size, which is a concern. But it's not to say that it's dead and buried. You know, the crayfish populations on here have made fishing on the Blackwater this summer and into early autumn very difficult, simply because presenting a bait in a water where you probably have a dozen or two crayfish, you know, you really got to hope that you land on top of a fish's head, or you pretty much getting a bait in his mouth first cast, because if you don't, you find yourself in a position whereas you're just being bombarded by constant crayfish. And even using hard hooker boilies, you know, you can't use luncheon meat. So and even I tried to use luncheon meat inside like 80 or 120 denier tights, you know, what they do in France to try and ward away the puss and chat and all of the crayfish as well. It hasn't seemed to work on here. They just seem to just keep yanking, and it just ruins presentation. And I'm sure the fish are down there smelling that bait and just not engaging, simply because the crayfish activity is just too great. You would like to think that a 12 or 13 pound barbel would be big and bold enough that if there were crayfish down there but that barbel wanted the bait, that it would just take it. So I'm not entirely sure exactly why I'm not getting the fish on here. The crayfish are definitely an issue. A very big issue. Someone, and I'm not going to say where I'm fishing, because then whoever it is that's crayfish trapping might know where I am, and other people might also realise as well. I like to keep where I'm fishing, where possible, discreet, for the simple fact that there are other people fishing this as well and don't necessarily want to put a burden on their fishing and potentially bringing more pressure on. Yes, it's a membership water, but it doesn't matter. The simple fact that you've got other anglers on here, you just got to have a level of respect for other people who are also fishing the same waters as you, and that, I like to think, is a prerequisite for every angler, you know, to have that mindset. Other waters that are like free fishing and day tickets that are very well known and have high levels of exposure through social media, etc., then maybe it's not so bad, because everybody knows you're not protecting the intimate fishing that maybe some of these places offer. You know, these are like the royalty fishery. You know, these are big bits of water that have seen pressure for 6-7 decades. You know, much more pressure than they do now. So it's nice sometimes just to come away somewhere, peace and quiet, in the middle of the Hampshire countryside, or Berkshire, depends on what side of the river you're on, and come here, just put a bait in the water and just hope that something happens. For me, it's a 122 mile round trip to come and fish this, so it's not close to home. But in the grand scheme of things, for the actual challenge, this for me is actually what I deem as local, which is crazy to think when you're doing 61 miles each way. But that's obviously the way that the challenge has now panned out. You know, I've pretty much consumed all of the waters within a 60-mile range of my house, which, let's be fair, Kent doesn't have an awful lot of options anyway, and London only has a couple of viable options as well, the Thames being one of them, to which I've done them. So it's a case of branching out further, and now it's the likes of the Bristol Avon, the team. You know, Yorkshire has numerous rivers that I'm still yet to chalk off. The Wharf, I've come close, 9.6. The Aire, I've dangled on a couple of times with no success. Then you got the likes of the Derwent, the Ouse, the Ure. Obviously the Ure then becomes the Swale. So is it two different rivers? Some people will say yes. I'm not so sure. I think the name's just changed. But even still, you know, there's some prolific areas on both the Ure, which is the upper reaches of technically what is the Swale, and obviously then the Swale as well. So I don't know. For me personally, I will probably just class my fishing on that catchment as the Swale. But there will be some people who will disagree with that, which is fair enough. We're allowed to disagree. We're allowed to be wrong. We're allowed to be right. As for the rest of the season so far, on the Barbel front, I've done a couple of trips up to Yorkshire. I've had some successes. As I say, on the Wharf, I've managed to better my Wharf PB by 1 ounce from 9.5 to 9.6. I've been on the Yorkshire Rother and had a fantastic 12-1, which was a fantastic fish. But earlier in the day, when I was down there with Steve May, who's actually done quite a sterling bit of effort down there on himself, on his own, and he's given me a couple of pointers in my brief visit down there, and yeah, his pointers definitely yielded the goods. While he was actually with me, I did have a take from a barbel, which unfortunately parted my hook link on some rocks. So I was pretty gutted and cursing my luck, and it was a big shame actually I wasn't able to manage something whilst he was present, because that would have been a nice touch, you know, but it wasn't to be. But later on in the evening, not too long before dark, I had an absolute rip-roaring take fishing this rocky / gravel channel, and it was an awesome take and a superb battle as well, which is not one I'll forget in a hurry. And given the flow as well being as placid as it is, it was quite a surprise actually they were putting up such a hard fight. You would have thought in such slow, sluggish water that they really wouldn't give it that much, but I would be wrong to suggest that. Must have been, I don't know, 12 hours later, I found myself on the banks of the River Idle. A gem, an absolute gem. Can't believe it's a river I've never actually stepped foot on, even if it wasn't for the 40 Rivers Challenge. An incredible piece of water, and I know it has had a bit of exposure over the last few years through social media and the record, I think, recently going in the last couple of years, which I think kind of put it on the map a little bit. I've gone down there to savour a little bit of that for myself, and the sport on the Idle was nothing short of exemplary, you know, especially for a river of that intimacy as well, and being clear too. It's the sort of river I grew up fishing as a youngster, which a few of you guys who know me would be the River Wandle. You know, yes, that hasn't got the fish that it used to, but actually I liken the River Idle very much to the Wandle. They're very, very similar in a lot of ways. Run clear, lots and lots of weed to contend with. All right, not as much loose weed in the Wandle as there is in the Idle, which does make fishing it quite difficult, but the Idle was pretty much the sort of stock of fish now that the Wandle did when I was in my teens / early 20s. So it's great to see a river fairly similar to something that I was used to in my childhood. They bring back some very, very good memories, and yeah, the Idles looked after me. On just two short trips, I've managed 3 10s, 10-3, 10-6 and 10-10. So it's provided me with some excellent sport, along with a couple of 9s and a smattering of 7s and 8s. To have a river where you can actively feed them as well, 8mm pellets, and watching the pellets go down, and then all of a sudden, as they're drifting down to the bottom, you see the barbel just come along and just picking them up, and as they gain confidence and more join into the swim, you actually watch them come up off the bottom and taking pellets mid-water. Bearing in mind an 8mm pellet is pretty small. but where it's so clear and so intimate, you know, you could be crouched down on your haunches and just watching these pellets go out, and then all of a sudden seeing the barbel just come along up off the bottom and almost tipping their heads with their bodies down and bringing their heads up and just picking up the pellets as they're filtering through the water column. It's an incredible experience, and for those anglers who fish the bigger rivers exclusively will never get to, you know, experience something like that. I find it really exciting. I think it's one of the best forms of angling that you could embark on, you know, go in there, sight fishing, and actually be able to actively feed fish in that manner. It's quite unusual, even on rivers that are quite intimate and small. You know, take the River Lee, the upper stretches of the Lee. It was possible in a couple of places, but I do find that as time goes on, you know, people are just embarking on these challenges of fishing the Trent, fishing the Thames, you know, big. Oh, that's a fish. Wow. Oh, on camera as well. I can't believe it. Incredible. Right. Oh, what a take that was. My God. Did that go? The barbel. Has to be barbel. There's no way that's a chart. Oh. What a take. That was quite incredible. Well, you can probably hear the racket screaming off in the background. The barbel, just seen it flash. Extraordinary. Here's barbel. Right. Well, amazingly, I haven't set the net up. It's been so quiet so far, so I'm going to quickly set the net up. Tension on the line. Oh, well, I was not expecting that, as you can imagine, given how tough it's been this season so far. But just goes to show, you know, don't give up. Keep going. You just never know when it's going to happen. It's not a bad fish either. It's not a double. It's a lovely dark fish. Nice bit of excitement. Bloody hell. Talk about right on cue. Well, if that happened every time I did one of my little catch-ups, I'd be a very happy man. It looks a fish of about 7 or 8 pounds. It's not going to grumble. As I say, the wind chill is, as you can feel, that easterly wind is quite biting. So it's not particularly nice. So that's warmed me up a bit. That's really good. Well, I'm going to wrap up the chat. I wish you all tight lines. Trip number 22 on the Blackwater has at least been a success. You know, as I say, I don't think it's a double. It looks about 7 or 8 pounds, but I'm not going to grumble too much about that. So, yeah, I wish you all tight lines. Enjoy the beginnings of winter. Hopefully, if you're not barbel fishing, you're out targeting something else. And I hope that it's fish filled, and we'll catch up with you sometime soon. Right. Adios, amigos.